what I want to do now is back to basics putting segment, right?
Okay.
Which is how we connected. So this is the
Yeah.
back to basics putting segment. Supporters of the podcast, support those who support the podcast. TM15 gets you 15% off. Designed by Richard Woodhouse Grant Field, used by Cam Smith, which is, you were telling me, Jake, right? You actually saw Cam using it. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was at a live golf event in Chicago.
That's right.
I know. So one of the greatest golf trips I ever took was with some of the guys from Live, and we went out to Bandon a couple years ago. And
Yeah.
I will say this: those guys really, they know how to take a golf trip. um, uh,
Yeah.
it's like the line from Jurassic Park: "We spared no expense." So I was out there. They're clients of mine, and so on and so forth. So there's a great picture of my youngest, who's a lefty, with Phil Mickelson and so on and so forth. And a lot of the coaches are there that I know, like George and Claude and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, I was just on the putting green, and I was talking to another player, and I saw Cam putting, and I'm sorry if Cam Smith's putting.
You're watching.
Yeah, you're watching. I mean, come on, that's as good as it looks, right?
Yeah.
It looks
Yeah.
good. It is good, right?
Yeah.
And I saw a mirror there's mirrors everywhere. There is chalk lines, elevated string lines, Sharpie markers, ball gates. That's a common PGA Tour, Live, whatever tour putting green. Well, I saw him working on a mirror. It was a different color. It was green. I didn't know what that was. And I was just kind of checking it out. I didn't actually think much of it, putting on a putting mirror. And then I noticed that about a 15-degree arc. And there was other training aid companies that had a 15-degree arc, but they didn't have it on the mirror. And I was like, oh. I go, well, that's a good idea. So that way you could see your eye line, your shoulder line, and so on. So I went up to Cam. I had had a conversation or something with him before. So I went up and I said, hey, man, what's with that mirror? I go, is that your mirror? Did you make that? And he goes, well, I had a hand in it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then that's when he mentioned Richard. And then I was already following Richard on Instagram and a lot of social channels. I believe him and I have had conversations in the past, but I just reached out to him. And I go, yeah, I'm out at the Live, and Cam's sitting here putting on a mirror, and it's got a 15-degree arc on it. I go, I think that's a great idea and long overdue. Where do I get one? And then he got me in touch with Back to Basics Golf. So
Yeah.
I now have every single thing Back to Basics Golf offers. But it really started with wanting that mirror.
Yeah.
Because I had been putting with putting mirrors my whole life. I had suggested that all my juniors, so every year for the USA Junior team, around December, I send out a list, because I'm very sympathetic to the family that was much like mine, where they're not a golfing family. No one in my family played golf. No one. So they don't know what to get their golfer, right? And I also would be agitated when I would get golf trinkets. I'm like, what am I doing with it? Would you find this at a garage sale? Like, what am I doing with this damn thing? So I give them a Christmas wish list for their junior golfer. And it's always a putting mirror, right? I'm like, this is very common with PGA Tour players working on eye line, putting strips, so on and so forth, where Back to Basics Golf has that as well, where you can work on your speed and so on and so forth. So I was always adding this to their Christmas list, but when I came across this, then I was being a little bit more. It used to be like any mirror will do, but now it's like, well, I mean, if you're going to get one, why not get one? So all of their stuff, all of our juniors on all 5 of our levels are using Back to Basic Golf products.
And what's your go-to putting thing? Do you have a putting tip that you can share with the listeners today?
Oh, that's a good one. A lot. I think the most important thing, it's almost like Mythbusters, right? I want to squash. Now, listen, if somebody's out there and they believe this to be true and they are seeing results from it, then I call that like, if you think about like puppy dogs and ice cream and that works for you, then that's fine. Then like continue to think about puppy dogs and ice
Yeah.
cream. I
Yes.
go,
Yes.
but if it's not, but if you're holding on to things as gospel while putting and not putting well, then
Mm,
I think you need some. I think you need some better options. So
mm,
yeah, there's a couple hot things with me. I usually am working. I'm a big believer in launch, which no amateur I ever talks to thinks about that. Declining acceleration. So
yes.
amateurs really mess with acceleration. I always
Mm,
kind of wonder how it would be accelerating through an object. So we
yes.
have
It's
that
crashing into it.
discussion.
Yes.
Right, crashing. It's crash. Like yeah, I always tell people, why don't you go accelerate your club through that tree? So Um, I,
That's
I've
good.
actually I've actually found so here'd be my quick little
Yeah.
tidbit. I've always found the best putters to have the most succinct follow throughs,
Yes.
and I've always found amateurs to have elongated follow throughs. In other words,
Yeah.
their backstrokes tend to be very generic,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's all about the follow through. Well, this
Mm,
is quite the contrary to what I one have experienced and two have measured with things like sand putt and so on.
yeah.
Whereas the backstroke has some variability, and I'm not saying the follow through doesn't, but it tends to be a little bit more succinct. So the energy is created, and the fastest point of acceleration. So I do look on that graph on Sam.
Mm,
It's interesting that how great Sam. I was taught by Dr. Christian Marquardt on Sam Putt in 2004 when it first came over, and yet that still is one of the best technologies out there for measuring a putting stroke. But I always look at the
yeah.
acceleration graph, and
Mm,
I was working for Suddy at the time, so really my first coaching of tour players at first was actually a putting coach,
yeah.
and lucky me, two of the guys that were going to Suddy at the time was Brad Faxon and Lauren Roberts. Lauren Roberts went to study for 25 years, 30
Oh,
years. So I was the first one to put sand
oh
putt
wow.
on both of their putters. So the acceleration graph was of great interest to me because at that time we didn't
Mm,
know quite what we were looking at, and I was always told, "Hey, you want to make sure you accelerate through the ball, and if you
yeah.
hit one bad, you decelerate through the ball." So that
Mm,
peak acceleration is usually somewhere after transition, and then it's in declining acceleration
yep.
of these great putters,
Yep.
also with their impact points and all that, how precise that was, and so on. So what I tend to tell people is try to make. So I did this. Roberto Diaz, who's a phenomenal short game player as is. So the fact that he even gives me credit for helping him with, I mean, I was just there for his swing, but he felt a little wavy with the putter, and I told him, and I gave Bill Haas this drill too. I had him put two tees, a ball gate typical size, but I put it very close. So we'll say the tees are kind of right here, and the ball's right here, and the putter's right behind it. So they had no follow through. That putter
Okay.
was
Yeah.
going to go into the tee.
And the
So
teas in front.
basically, what that taught him was it taught him to vary the backstroke, um,
Yeah.
because I was depriving them of the follow through.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of amateurs out there listening would say, well, he's teaching deceleration. No, I'm teaching declining acceleration. That putter is still moving forward, and if the tees weren't there, would move forward still. But what
Yeah.
they learned really quickly is they learned that the backstroke has value in
Yeah.
terms of creating energy, and they learned to get the energy basically out of the putter there after the ball. And another thing I was always told was that you didn't want to recoil your stroke. Well, it turns out when it comes to those graphs, that recoil is actually something I see a lot of the best putters do,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the sense that they get the energy out of the putter and then it almost wants to work backwards after the ball.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I know that's quite like the
No,
great
it's
golf
not.
coaches.
Yeah.
The great golf coaches that listen to your podcast are like, well, yeah, but there's amateurs that listen to your are right now. I don't talk to a lot of amateurs that think that way about their putting, and
Yeah.
my suggestion would be if you're struggling with your ability to control the distance consistently, that might be one of my go-tos. That perhaps you're messing with your acceleration because you believe it to be the problem.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't the problem, but now you've made it into the problem by constantly, basically trying to hit putts harder or softer with more follow through.
And I love that. And I reckon it was one of the last myths I can probably publicly remember that I got told. One of the things I was like, oh, wow, that's completely different to what I thought of. We've seen few things, through, most of it's been through a short game, right? That we've been, I guess, busted or myth busted. You could probably use that term in relationship to things that we thought were happening, and clearly the exact opposite is happening. Can you actually share with us, because I think it's really important. I think there's a lot of new coaches listening to this, Jake, right? Like a lot of new coaches and young coaches love this for educational purposes. Can you share declining acceleration and how it's not deceleration? Can you explain that a little bit further?
So basically, its peak acceleration is not impact. In fact, its peak acceleration is not even close to impact. It's right after transition, right after the putter. And by the way, I'm not saying I'm open to seeing anything, right? I really am. I'm not saying that. It just seemed to me, and especially 2004, 2005, I'm looking at, like, you don't think I went home and looked at every single graph on what Brad Faxon and Lauren Roberts were doing? I mean, you got to be kidding me, right? So what I noticed is that the putter's peak acceleration was, that it seemed to be the further that was away from impact, the better the putter was. Because we had other tour players in there that were told the same thing, and their peak acceleration was close to the point of touch. And they would tell me, now this is experiential knowledge, I'm there as their coach, and I'm there to give them something to hopefully, improve upon them. Over the long haul, the macro view here. So they would tell me that their feel was very suspect. So those and there was other ones in there. That's a different discussion on the belief of yips and so on and so forth. An uncontrollable hit impulse that comes from the brain, focal dystonia. Again. Those that believe themselves to have it, I also found that acceleration was closer to impact. So the funniest thing is the best way I could say it for the new golf coaches out there is that the putter is slowing at right after the transition without collision.
I like it. I like that. I tell you what, you got me thinking about the yip thing there too, about acceleration at the point of the ball. Actually, that's
it was always the case for people that claim to have had it. And again, I don't know. I teach a hand surgeon who is retired, did it for 30 years. I asked him about focal dystonia, and I go, "Is that a real thing?" He goes, "Oh yeah, and it's a real thing." I go, "How many times did you see that in your 30 years?" He goes, 2 or 3. And I go,
wow.
Yeah, and I go, so if Hank Haney, hopefully he won't hear this. I go, if Hank Haney says 1/4 of all golfers have this, what say you? And he goes, they don't have that. He goes, they just have probably poor technique. He goes, you'd be the one to speak to that though.
Yeah.
So so somewhere. Let's consider that one. That's one source, and then 2. That's another source. So somewhere in between 1/4 of all golfers and 3 people in 30 years, somewhere in between there, the truth lies. More than likely, hopefully, if you're out there and you're listening, hopefully we provide a beacon of hope here that maybe, just maybe, you haven't explored all options, and maybe the things that you accept as gospel and truth. And you have to do this to putt. Well, maybe that is not such, and maybe it is lend itself to your problems. So now you believe yourself to have a neurological disorder.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I love how you keep putting ownership on the play. You've always said that people that claim to have the yips, or people that claim to have this, or what you are branding yourself as, like you're using that language there, that the person is claiming it, and you become what you think you do, what you are too, right?
So that also comes, it always gets back to the psychology, doesn't it? That also comes from the behavioral sciences. Now, this is a stark opinion. Okay, this is my opinion, and this has been my experience, because there would be other people in this field that would argue this point. But it has been my opinion that I didn't enjoy when a child knew their own diagnosis because I would witness them hide behind it. Well,
Mm,
I have ADHD,
mm,
so I have it, so I can't concentrate. I have this. I never saw the benefit in the knowing.
mm.
I always saw the benefit in the strategy, right? So in the knowing, there's something very concrete about it. There's something very certain, and certainty always scares me. So when a
Yeah.
child is certain, well, my parents told me, so I have a learning disability.
Mm,
You know, uh, that certainty frightens me because it gives us no place to go. So if you're out there and you are struggling with this, find a golf coach that isn't certain, because there might be more avenues for you to explore to unlock, in this case, better putting.
yeah. God, that's powerful. And it's like that self-talk when you catch with someone, right? And you're giving a lesson to someone and say it, you're coaching someone, it doesn't go well after a couple of shots, and you can hear that chat. Oh, there it is. I always do that. That's me. That's me again. Rah, rah, rah. And you can hear that self-talk. It's not like they're trying to discover the new thing they're looking for or trying to reaching out. It's like they've come back to, oh, that's what I always do. This is me. Rah, rah, rah. I mean, we're not going to get anywhere with that kind of self-talk, right? But anyways, that brings us to the end of the Back to Basics putting segment, which was just about my favorite one yet. Support those, support
Thank
the
you.
podcast. TM15, get you 15% off. Thanks to everyone who keeps purchasing too, because every time we upload a podcast, I see all the emails come through. And it's great to see. I do think it's the best product, and I only align myself with the best products. Net return and things like this, things that I
Same.
believe in. Absolutely. But anyways, that was fantastic.